Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Mahalik, and for this class project I did my report on one of the greatest heroes and villains of the American Revolution. And this of course would be Benedict Arnold, who is mostly known today for his acts of treason later in the war. But in the early years of the war he was one of the most successful and capable American commanders, an amazing leader of men, very ambitious, determined officer, who on three separate occasions saved the American cause from an early defeat. And the first of these is during the Quebec campaign of the fall and winter of 75 into 76. And this begins with a disastrous march across Maine. Most things that could have gone wrong did, with supplies being ruined, disease, near starvation of his men, desertion, bad weather. The trip itself was about double the length that his maps indicated that it would be, and nevertheless, through his own personal bravery, determination, and fortitude, he is able to will his men to continue the march, and they do successfully march all the way to Quebec City, where, again, another challenge is faced, that there's not enough time left to besiege the city, because in the springtime the British would be able to bring reinforcements, and his men's enlistments are up at the end of the year, so he has only one option left, which is to assault the city on New Year's Eve. And he personally leads the assault, but is wounded in the leg while attacking the city, and with his wounding and his subordinate's death, the attack falls apart. And some historians believe that if these two men had been able to avoid these becoming casualties, that his plan very well could have taken Quebec City, with a massive change to the war as well. But then in the spring, with the British reinforcements, he once again is able to keep his men together as they march southward in retreat, and he himself is the last man to leave Canada after all his men are safely away. And this leads us to our second event in which he saved the American cause, which is the Battle of Valcour Island on Lake Champlain. And throughout the spring and summer of 1776, the British begin constructing a fleet on the lake with the goal of moving southward down the lake, taking Fort Ticonderoga, and then continuing on down the Hudson River to New York City, cutting the New England colonies from the rest of the Revolution. And the only force available to stop this threat is Benedict Arnold's army that he retreated with, along with some militia that he's able to gather from the surrounding regions. And he begins building a fleet to counter the British. And even though his men aren't sailors or shipwrights, by late summer he has a fleet on the lake patrolling, doing delaying actions, striking weak British outposts and the like. And the British fleet isn't fully active on the lake until mid-fall, at which point Arnold knows he can't match the British. He's terribly outgunned, but he has to do something to delay them, and so he sets an ambush for the British. And his plan worked perfectly. He simply didn't have the firepower to effectively engage the British ships, and after a day of heavy fighting, his men performed incredibly well, but he has no way of continuing the battle another day, and so he decides to slip through the British lines and begin a running battle to the south end of the lake. And his ship, of course, brings up the rear, and after he's gone as far as he knows his ships can make it, his ship is badly damaged and sinking. He beaches his ships, burns them so they can't fall into enemy hands, and leads his men in an orderly retreat back to Fort Ticonderoga. And he's able to buy enough time that the defenses at Ticonderoga are enhanced, and the British have no choice but to retreat northward, being out of time for the winter. So this is a major victory for the American cause. But in the spring of 77, General Burgoyne will attempt the same plan that the British had tried in the previous year, and this time Arnold is a subordinate of Gates in this campaign, and Gates sets up their defenses around Saratoga, but it's Arnold who notices a critical flaw in their defenses and chooses to engage the British at Freeman's Farm to cover their exposed flank. And Eventually, as the Battle of Saratoga is nearing its end, it's Arnold who leads a charge straight at the British lines to break them in the pivotal moments of the battle. And again, he's wounded in his leg in the process. And it's been said that if the bullet had instead killed him, he would be one of the greatest heroes of the Revolution. But you know the rest of the story. While Arnold is recovering from his wound, Horatio Gates claims all the credit for the victory, leaving Arnold very bitter and resentful both at his fellow commanders and at Congress. And eventually this will lead him to betray his country. Arnold's later actions would erase the memory of most of his triumphs as an American officer. But despite his tarnished legacy, the fact remains that Benedict Arnold was one of the most successful commanders the Americans had, and without him, it's doubtful that the colonies could have been victorious over the British.